My hands are steady now, but they weren't then. They used to shake every time the phone rang, every time the door creaked, every time something good dared to happen. People think a curse is fire or blood, a dramatic spectacle. It isn't, it's subtle. It's a sickness that targets your joy. It lets you build your tower, sometimes years it takes, and then on the very last step it kicks the foundation out. The most unsettling part, it's the moment you stop believing it's bad luck and you start believing it's a sentient thing. I was 27, sitting in our sun-drenched, brand-new apartment, watching Musa map out our future. He was sprawled on the floor, a pencil gripped between his teeth, blueprints spread like a challenge. Look at this kitchen," he murmured, his voice thick with excitement. "We'll host everyone, the whole family, no more excuses." His face, open and beaming, was the picture of clean, simple happiness, the one thing my bloodline had been denied for 3 generations. I loved him for that certainty, that uncomplicated faith in tomorrow. I was listening, nodding, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin when the light briefly failed, just a flicker, a second of darkness, and when the light rushed back I saw it, a shadow, flat and fast, move across the wall where the window shouldn't have been. It wasn't the shadow of a passing bird or a cloud. It was too dense, too sudden. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. It was gone. The apartment was bright again. Musa hadn't even noticed. He was still tracing lines on the paper. "Did you see that?" I asked, my throat dry. "See what, my love, the genius of this pantry layout?" He laughed. I forced a smile, but the warmth was gone. A cold certainty, heavy and sharp, had settled in my stomach. It had found me. I tried to rationalize it away. Stress, exhaustion, flickering city power. But the feeling was rooted deep in the generational trauma I had tried so hard to deny. My family history wasn't a tapestry of achievements. It was a graveyard of almosts. It was the long, slow, agonizing history of greatness snatched away at the final moment. There was Uncle Kofi, my mother's eldest brother, who was perhaps the most tragic testament to the curse. He was a prodigy, securing a full scholarship to study engineering in London, a ticket out, a chance to elevate our entire name. The village celebrated him. My grandfather, Kwame, in his later years, cried tears of immense pride. Uncle Kofi packed his trunk, kissed his mother goodbye, and waited for the letter confirming his flight. It never came. Not because the college withdrew the offer, but because 2 days before the departure, a sudden, debilitating fever struck him. He was delirious, close to death for 10 days. By the time he recovered, the plane was gone. The scholarship was forfeit. He spent the rest of his life tending a small garden outside the hospital where he recovered, a brilliant mind reduced to pulling weeds. That's what the curse did. It didn't kill, it crippled potential. Then there was Aunt Adwoa, the family historian, the one who would eventually give me the key. When she was young, she was engaged to a politician, a rising star who adored her. Their wedding was the most opulent event our family had ever hosted, a display of Kwame's wealth and power. The ceremony was beautiful. The feast lasted 3 days. But on the final, ceremonial day, her fiancé was caught in a horrifying, manufactured scandal. An accusation so grotesque and believable that it destroyed his career overnight. He didn't deny it. He simply looked at Adwoa with empty eyes, confessed he couldn't drag her into his ruin, and left. The curse struck on the very threshold of commitment, ensuring that love could never translate into lasting joy. Adwoa never married. She became the quiet keeper of our sorrow. And finally, my cousin, Ben, wasn't a man of tradition. He was a pure technologist, always tinkering with circuits and light. He invented a low-cost solar lighting solution that could power entire rural communities. Investors were lined up. A launch date was set. He was going to revolutionize the continent. The day before he was due to sign the 7-figure manufacturing contract, his workshop suffered a catastrophic flood. Not from a burst pipe, but from a freak storm that only seemed to affect his small section of the industrial park. Everything was waterlogged, circuits fried, prototypes ruined. He didn't just lose the money, he lost the spark. He now works a dreary government job, unable to recreate the genius that was destroyed in that single, tragic night. He lost the light of his creativity. This was my inheritance, a catalogue of agonizing near misses, a family legacy defined not by poverty, but by frustrated greatness. I tried to talk to my mother about it after the shadow incident. I approached her carefully, armed with the cold logic I learned in law school. "Mama," I started, "don't you think it's strange? 3 generations. Every great success, every time we reach for true happiness, something inexplicable happens. It's statistical anomaly at this point." She was stirring a pot of soup, her back rigid. Her shoulders were always tight, a result of decades spent carrying unspoken fear. She kept her eyes on the simmering broth. Statistical anomaly, she repeated, the words tasting like dry dust. You and your city words. There is no anomaly, my child. There is only life, hard, difficult life. But Aunt Adwoa, Uncle Kofi, Ben, Musa and I are starting to talk about buying a house, Mama. I'm up for partner, I'm scared. The fear was finally making its way past the denial, a raw, desperate plea. She slammed the wooden spoon down on the counter. It was a loud, shocking sound. Her eyes, usually warm and tired, were now cold and hard. You will stop this nonsense now. It is bad luck, nothing more. You worry too much. You talk too much. You have the sickness of overthinking. My father, your grandfather Quame, he worked hard and he was blessed. We are the inheritors of his hard work. Do you hear me? Hard work, not some wicked village fairy tale. You are safe in this city. You are protected by your education. Do not summon ghosts by giving them voice. Just work, be quiet, and it will be fine. Her denial was a fortress built to keep the scary truth out. But I realized then that her refusal to acknowledge the spiritual reality was a curse in itself. She wasn't protecting me, she was enforcing the silence. And that silence, I would soon learn, was precisely what the serpent was waiting for. It was the food that kept the curse alive. I had to choose, live in my mother's denial or confront the shadows my grandfather cast 50 years ago. I chose the shadows. The most unsettling thing about a curse isn't the final blow. It's the moment of choice that gives it power. My grandfather, Quame, wasn't a fool. He knew the land, the proverbs, the rhythm of the seasons. But when the rhythms broke, so did his pride. For 3 long years the rains betrayed him. His fields, once a sea of green, became a cracked, brown face staring up at a merciless sun. He sold his livestock, his best tools, even his favourite cloth just to buy food. The hunger in his children's eyes was a fire in his belly. The whispers of the elders, their pity, were a poison. A man of his strength, a man of his standing, reduced to this. It was a slow, public death. One evening, my grandmother, her stomach swollen with my mother, placed a small piece of preserved meat in his calloused hands. It is all that is left, she said, her voice a whisper. We will be fine. But in her eyes he saw not hope, but a deep, quiet terror. The shame was too great, the responsibility too heavy. That night, as the moon rose like a sliver of bone in a black sky, a desperate thought took root in his mind. I will not be a beggar, I will not fail. He left his home, not for the village square or the elder's hut, but for the dark edge of the forest where the whispers became a silent, beckoning promise. He found the Babalawos' hovel on the edge of the forest where the path disappeared into a tangle of thick roots and silent trees. It was not a place of comfort or warmth. The air was heavy with the smell of old smoke, dried herbs, and something else, something cold and metallic that pricked at the back of your throat. Inside, the walls were lined with strange, unsettling carvings of twisted human figures and serpents. The silence was not a peaceful silence. It was a hungry, waiting silence, broken only by the crackle of a single fire. The Babalawo, a small, unassuming man with eyes that seemed to have no bottom, did not greet him. He simply gestured to a woven mat. Quame sat. I have come for a blessing, he said, his voice raw. The Babalawo's lips barely moved. Blessings are for the righteous. You came for a bargain. He was not interested in a sacrifice of goats or yams. He didn't want prayers. He wanted something different. Your ancestors are angry, he said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. They have turned their faces from you, but I can give you what they will not. I can give you a river of prosperity, but a river must be fed. The cost is a generational fee. My grandfather, in his foolish desperation, didn't ask what that meant. He didn't question the coldness of the man or the absence of the gods. He heard the word prosperity and felt his heart pound with a wild, exhilarating hope. The Babalawo told him to bring an anchor, an object that held the spirit of his bloodline. Quame returned the next night carrying the carved stool. It was no ordinary piece of wood. It was an heirloom, passed down from father to son for as long as anyone could remember. The faces of his forefathers were carved into its legs, their eyes staring out in silent judgment. It was the physical embodiment of his family's pride and history. The Babalawo took it without a word. He led Quame to a withered baobab tree, its branches gnarled and bare. The ground around it was hard and dark, as if nothing had ever grown there. The Babalawo placed the stool in a shallow hole, poured a thick black substance over it and covered it with dirt. He did not say a prayer. He did not chant. He simply looked at Quame with those cold eyes and said, "The serpent is bound, the river is yours." Quame, his heart racing with a mixture of terror and immense relief, did not look back. He did not watch the man complete the ritual. He simply turned and walked away. He thought he had saved his family. He thought he had paid a small price for a lifetime of comfort. He had no idea he had just sold their souls, their joy, and their future for a single moment of fleeting pride. He didn't look at the stool as he handed it over. He simply pushed it across the dirt floor, away from himself, away from the man he had once been. He was saving them, he thought. He was actually enslaving them, giving a hungry spirit a seat at the table of our lives, to be fed with our every sorrow. The most unsettling thing about a deal with a malevolent spirit isn't the penalty, it's the period of false grace that precedes it. My grandfather, Quaim, returned from the hovel to an empty, silent village, and for a moment he felt a flicker of doubt, a cold dread. What had he done? But the doubt melted away with the first drops of rain the very next day. A soft, gentle rain, the kind he hadn't seen in years. It lasted for a week, and when the sun finally broke through the clouds, the withered earth looked like a living thing again, a dark, rich canvas of possibilities. Crops exploded. It was a harvest of myth. The yams were so large it took 2 men to carry a single one. The maize was tall and golden. Neighbours who had pitied him for so long came to see the miracle. They called him blessed, a man touched by the gods. He laughed, a deep, booming laugh of relief and triumph. He didn't just rebuild his farm, he built a grain mill, the first in the region. He was hailed as a king, his pride swelling to fill the emptiness that had once consumed him. He was a hero to his community, a saviour to his family. The curse, he thought, must have been a trick of the mind, a momentary madness. He was home free. He had beaten the spirits at their own game. The day my mother was born, the air in the village was thick with celebration. The baby was healthy, beautiful, with a cry that promised a long, vibrant life. My grandmother, her face finally free of fear, wept tears of joy. Quaim, holding his newborn daughter, felt a love so profound it made his heart ache. He had a family, a legacy, a future. He had everything. But the serpent, a patient and cunning collector, chose that very day to demand its first payment. Adoma, Quaim's beloved younger sister, the woman who had taught him how to count and how to read the clouds, was found in her small hut. She was just sitting there, a bowl of water in her lap, her eyes open, her face peaceful, but she wasn't breathing. The healers came, the elders came, but there was no explanation. No illness, no injury. It was a death so sudden and so gentle that it was more terrifying than any fever. It was a surgical, precise strike. My grandfather, who had just held new life in his arms, now stood over a body, cold and silent. The tears he cried for Adoma were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of dawning horror. He knew the cost. The Babalawo's words echoed in his mind. Every victory you claim, your children will pay for with a wound. He had his prosperity. The price was his sister's life. The curse was real. It had accepted the payment. Quaim's life became a strange, terrifying dance. He would celebrate a business deal with one hand while holding a bucket for a funeral with the other. The joy and the sorrow were 2 sides of the same terrible coin. He was terrified. He tried to protect his family. He tried to hide the terrible truth. He took a heavy hammer and a handful of small, smooth stones, and he went to the hiding place of the carved stool. He built a false wall of earth and mud, plastering it over the spot, burying the cursed object in the darkest corner of his new home. He thought that by hiding it, he could escape its grasp. His wife, who had seen his face that terrible day, watched him. She never asked what he was doing. She didn't need to. She saw the fear in his eyes. She saw the way his smile no longer reached them. She had her home, her children, her wealth, but she had lost her husband. She lost him to a secret she would never be told, and in her quiet, terrible wisdom she began her life of silent terror. She never spoke of it. The family's silence was not just a habit. It was a way of life, a desperate, hopeless attempt to starve a serpent that fed on quiet shame and unexpressed pain. People who didn't know our family saw me as the golden child. I was a lawyer living in the city with a life that promised to be different. I was smart, I was confident, and I had built a career from nothing. My law firm was a glass tower, and I was climbing it. Every morning, the high-rise felt like a fortress against the superstitious fears that haunted my family. My desk was a clean, minimalist space with 3 computer screens. On one, a massive spreadsheet tracked my biggest project to date, a corporate merger that would make partner. My colleagues, all razor-sharp and ambitious, treated me with a respect I had earned, not inherited. I was on the cusp of everything. I was on the precipice of a victory so immense, so irrefutable, that it would silence the curse forever. My happiness wasn't just a professional thing, it was personal. Musa was the opposite of my family's quiet despair. He was full of light. He laughed loudly and often. He was an architect, and he saw the world in clean lines and beautiful designs. With him there was no shadow. There was no unspoken grief. He saw our future as a blank canvas, a house we would build with our own hands, with a yard where our children would play. He proposed on a Friday evening. We were on a small hill overlooking the city, and the streetlights below were a river of gold. The ring was simple, a band of unadorned silver, but it was perfect. It wasn't a family heirloom, not a relic burdened by history. It was just us, just a promise. "I want to build a life with you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "A life where every day is a new beginning." He didn't know that for me, a new beginning was a betrayal of my past, a risky gamble with a spirit that had been fed on failed dreams for 50 years. We talked for hours, planning our future, our home, our children. The idea of bringing new, innocent life into our family, a family that had been bled dry by a generational debt, should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a wild, arrogant joy. I was so sure I had escaped. The curse isn't fire and blood, it's a clinical, chilling attack. It happened late one night. I was alone in my office, tying up a loose end on my biggest case, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I felt so alive, so powerful. That's when it happened. I got a single, blank email from an untraceable address. The subject line was empty. The body was a single, black dot. It looked like a full stop, a period, an ending. I deleted it. I didn't think, I just deleted it. And then my screen flickered. The monitor on my right, the one that held all the critical, irreplaceable files for my case, went dark. A second later it came back on. The file was there. I tried to open it. An error message popped up, not in code, but in a simple, chilling phrase. Data corrupted. Files permanently lost. I tried every recovery tool, every backup, every piece of advice I could find. There was nothing. The file, my entire career, was just gone. The attack wasn't chaotic. It wasn't a virus or a computer glitch. It was too clean. It was surgical. The curse wasn't a force of nature. It was a sniper, and its target was the thing I had worked my entire life for. It had found me. The most unsettling thing about falling is the moment you realize you aren't flying. My life, my beautiful, carefully constructed life, began to unravel with a terrifying swiftness that no one, not even I, could have predicted. The morning after my computer was attacked, I walked into the law firm with a cold dread settled deep in my bones. My boss, a man of quiet authority and immense respect, was waiting for me. He had a look of profound disappointment, as if I had personally betrayed him. The boardroom was filled with senior partners. Their faces were an unreadable sea of professionalism. They didn't shout. There was no anger, just a quiet, clinical dissection of my failure. "The file was a critical component of the entire merger," my boss said, his voice flat. "Without it, the deal is dead. We cannot move forward. We cannot trust this to happen again." I tried to speak. I tried to explain the strange, untraceable file, but the words caught in my throat. My voice, usually clear and confident, came out as a broken, hoarse whisper. It was the sound of my life shattering. They didn't fire me with malice. They simply removed me, as if I were a piece of malfunctioning equipment. They left me in a cold, echoing office with a box of my belongings, a testament to a life I had built and lost in a single night. That was the professional death. The personal death was slower, more agonizing. When I came home that evening, Musa wasn't there. I found him sitting on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. When I tried to touch his hand, he flinched. He was distant, cold. The man who had been my constant source of warmth and laughter was now a stranger. The laughter was gone. The jokes were gone. He started picking petty fights over insignificant things, the salt on his food, the way I had folded a towel. Anything to create a chasm between us. I begged him to talk to me. "What is wrong?" I would plead, tears streaming down my face. He would just stare at me with a frighteningly blank expression, as if he was looking at something he no longer recognized. It was as if the curse, after failing to break my hope by ruining my career, had decided to work through the person I loved most. It was turning him into a weapon against me, a cruel, final blow to ensure my despair was complete. The final conversation wasn't a conversation at all. It was a recitation. He came home one evening with a bag, his face impassive. I knew immediately. I knew this was the end. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice as flat as a rock. There was no yelling, no shouting, no tearful accusations. There was just a deep, terrifying emptiness in his eyes. He said, "I can't do this anymore. You're too much pressure." The words weren't his. They were too simple, too cold, too devoid of any human emotion. They felt like a line from a script, recited by someone who had been rehearsed and manipulated. He didn't look at me, didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked away, a ghost of the man who had asked me to build a future with him. I was left standing in the rubble of a life that was supposed to be perfect, just like everyone else in my family before me. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was a puppet, and my strings had just been cut. The curse had successfully turned my greatest love into my deepest source of pain. I was utterly, completely alone. The most unsettling thing about a lie is that it's not the telling that makes it real, but the silent agreement to live inside it. After Musa left, after my life imploded, I didn't know what to do. I had lost everything, and the silence from my family was a deafening roar. I returned to my mother's city apartment, a place that felt more like a tomb than a home. It was spotless, quiet, full of unsaid things. My mother, who had been a lioness when I was a child, was now a woman of steel and concrete, her face a mask of denial. I tried to talk to her. I sat her down, and with my voice raw from grief I told her everything. The corrupted file, the way Musa had looked at me, the feeling that something outside of me was orchestrating this all. She listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her eyes were a terrifying blank. "What you are saying," she said, her voice flat, "is nonsense. You lost your job, your relationship failed. These things happen." I begged her to see. "This isn't just a coincidence, Mama. It's the curse, it's the same thing that happened to Uncle Kofi and to you." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My mother's face finally cracked, and a deep, furious anger burned in her eyes. "Don't you ever speak that word in this house again," she spat. "It is an old wives' tale. It is a lie. If you talk about it, you give it power." Her stoic denial was not a wall built to protect me. It was a cage built to keep us all trapped. Desperate and defeated, I sought out my Aunt Adwoa. She was the only one who seemed to live in the past. She was the family's quiet historian, the one who held all the memories in her heart and never spoke of them. I found her in her small, crowded apartment, surrounded by old photographs and worn, tattered books. She didn't flinch when I told her what had happened. She just sighed, a long, weary sound that carried the weight of decades. "I have been waiting for you," she said, her voice a whisper. "I knew it would come for you eventually. The curse takes the brightest. It wants to feed on the most vibrant light." She then did something that sent a shiver down my spine. She pulled out a brittle, leather-bound book from a dusty shelf. It was the old family Bible. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but in the back, tucked away in the margins, were the last frantic writings of my grandfather. His handwriting, once strong and confident, was now shaky, the words spilling onto the page in a desperate jumble. "The serpent is well fed," he had scrawled. "Do not speak its name. Do not let it know you see it. It feeds on our anger and our sorrow. Do not speak." My blood ran cold. The curse wasn't just a magical punishment. It was a sentient being that was feeding on our silence, our fear, and our shame. My grandfather hadn't just made a bargain, he had fed a beast. Adwoa then took a deep breath and opened a worn family photo album. She pointed to a picture of her younger self, a vibrant, happy woman, smiling widely. "This was the week before my engagement to a good man," she said, her voice flat. "The curse took him from me just like it took Musa from you. It always waits until you have everything to take it all away. We tried to talk to your mother, to your uncles, but they refused. They buried the shame of Quames packed so deep that it poisoned us from the inside out. She gave the curse its name, the binding of the serpent, and its purpose, concealment." I looked at the album, at the faces of my family, and I finally understood. The curse wasn't about bad luck. It was about a bargain that had to be kept. It was about a family that had to live in silent, crippling shame so that the curse could continue to feed. The curse hadn't just destroyed our lives, it had stolen our truth, and I was now faced with the terrifying choice of living in my mother's denial or fighting a battle my family had been too afraid to even acknowledge. The most unsettling thing about finding the truth is realizing it was never lost. It was just buried under a mountain of fear. After my Aunt Adwoa gave me the name of the curse and the reason for our silence, I knew what I had to do. My mother's denial was a fortress, but I had found the secret door. The only way to break the curse, to free my family from a sorrow that had been passed down for 3 generations, was to find the spiritual guide Mama Tiwa. But the journey to her village was not for the faint of heart. It was a long, brutal journey by bus, then by a rattling shared taxi, and finally on foot. I had left behind the comfort of the city, the clean, smooth roads, the air-conditioned cars, the simple, predictable nature of urban life. The roads were now made of red, dusty earth, and every bump felt like a punch to the stomach. The air was thick and heavy, and the sun beat down with a relentless fury. I was a city girl used to taking an elevator and walking on pavement. This was a different world, and I felt the arrogance of my former life fall away with every step. I was tired, I was hungry, I was terrified, but I had to keep going. I was no longer fighting for a career or a relationship. I was fighting for my family's soul. Along the way, I met a man, a trader with a kind face and a wary expression. He noticed my city clothes, my expensive but now dusty shoes. He told me he was going to the same remote village to visit his sick mother. "You are going to see the spirit woman?" he asked, his voice low. I told him I was. He gave me a strange, unsettling look. "Be careful," he said. "They are not healers, they are not what they seem. They take your money, your things, and they give you nothing. This is all village nonsense. It is all fear and superstition." He didn't shout or argue. He spoke with a quiet, certain fear, a fear that I had seen in my mother's eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to believe that this was all a terrible coincidence, a series of unfortunate events, and that the curse was just a phantom of my imagination. But the words of my aunt, the sight of my grandfather's frantic scrawl in the old Bible, and the cold, empty feeling in my heart were all very, very real. I had come too far. I had to continue. When I finally arrived at the village, it was quiet and still. Mama Tiwa's compound was not what I had expected. There were no strange rituals, no loud chants, no theatrical displays of magic. It was a simple home, a mud brick house with a thatched roof. A small, unassuming woman with eyes that seemed to have no bottom sat on a woven mat, cleaning vegetables. She looked up at me. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just looked. And then she spoke, her voice calm and clear. "My name is Mama Tiwa. I have been expecting you, your name." She had never seen me before. She had never heard my name. She knew I was coming. I didn't need to tell her the story. I didn't need to explain the curse or my grandfather's terrible bargain. She looked at me, her eyes seeing all the way back to the beginning. She said, "It is not bad luck you carry. It is a debt of pride." My grandfather, she explained, was so proud that he was willing to trade his family's joy for a temporary show of wealth. The curse, the serpent, was the price of his arrogance. I had not come to see a sorceress. I had come to see a seer, a woman who saw the truth, no matter how painful it was. The only way to break the curse was not with a ritual, but with a confession. The most unsettling thing about finding a solution is realizing it is far worse than the problem. Mama Tiwa sat on her woven mat, her eyes fixed on me, and she told me the most terrifying truth I had ever heard. The curse was not a simple spell to be broken with a chant or a sacrifice of a goat. It was a contract. My grandfather, in his desperate pride, had made a deal with a spiritual entity, a serpent that fed on the silence and shame of our bloodline. And for the contract to be broken, the condition had to be undone. "The serpent was given what it wanted," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. "It was given a lie to feed on, the lie of your grandfather's prosperity, the lie that he was a man of the people, a man of God, not a man who dealt in darkness. The curse is the silenced child. The curse is the shame you all carry in your hearts. The serpent feeds on it. You cannot kill it. You cannot starve it. You must give it what it despises most, the truth." I waited for her to tell me about a ritual, a sacred dance, a powerful potion, but she didn't. She told me the only way to break the curse was to confess, to go back to the village where the shame began and in front of everyone, confess my grandfather's sin, to expose the truth that my family had spent 50 years burying, to tell them that the family's wealth, their supposed blessing, was a lie built on a dark, unholy bargain. The curse was feeding on our fear of public ridicule, on our desperate need to be seen as a good and honest family. The only way to starve it, to kill it, was to give it the one thing it couldn't stand, the bright, harsh, terrible light of the truth. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The idea was absurd, it was terrifying. It meant destroying the last remaining threads of my grandfather's reputation. It meant losing the family's good name, the last hollow remnant of our so-called honor. My mother would never agree. My aunts, who had suffered in silence for so long, would be furious. They would see it as the ultimate betrayal. "They will disown you," Mama Tiwa said, as if she could read my thoughts. "They will see it as a deeper shame than the curse itself. They will be angry, they will be hurt, but they will be free." I wrestled with the cost. I had already lost my career. I had lost the love of my life. What more could I lose? I could lose my family. I could be a pariah, a laughingstock, a cautionary tale. But I thought of Uncle Kofi's wasted genius. I thought of Aunt Adwoa's lonely life. I thought of the empty, broken look in my mother's eyes. I was at the end of a long, dark road, and I had to choose. I had to choose between my family's fleeting dignity and their everlasting freedom. I knew what I had to do. The price of freedom was not cheap. It would cost me everything, but it was a price I was willing to pay. The most unsettling thing about a final confrontation is the moment you realize the monster isn't outside you. It's the fear inside everyone you love. When I returned to my family with Mama Tiwa's brutal solution, that we must confess Quame's sin publicly, the betrayal was immediate, sharp, and absolute. I tried to explain the truth to my mother and my Aunt Adwoa. showing them the pages from the old family Bible, detailing how the serpent was starving on their silence. My mother's eyes, usually so stoic, were suddenly blazing with a terrible, familiar rage. "You want to ruin us," she screamed, her voice breaking a lifetime of carefully constructed composure. "You want to stand in front of the world and call your grandfather a dealer in shadows. You will bring a deeper shame. We will be pariahs. We will lose everything." My Aunt Adwoa, the quiet historian, surprisingly sided with her sister. "The curse is a burden, yes," she whispered, tears tracking lines through the dust on her face, "but dignity is all we have left. Do not take that too." They threatened to disown me, to never speak my name again, but I had come too far. I had lost everything already. What was family reputation compared to freedom? I had to proceed alone. The village square where Quame's success had once been celebrated was now filled with curiosity and hostility. I stood on the raised platform where the chief usually made announcements, holding the brittle, yellowed pages of the old family Bible. The air was heavy, charged with unspoken history. As I began to speak, detailing the withered crops, the desperate bargain, the ancestral stool, and the name of the spirit, the binding of the serpent, my voice trembled, but it did not break. I didn't defend Quame. I simply told the truth. His pride created the shame, and our silence fed it. I spoke about Uncle Kofi, about Aunt Adwoa, about my own lost future, and how every good thing in our life was always followed by a wound. Then something extraordinary happened. As the shame broke, as the truth was finally spoken aloud, the air changed. The heavy, oppressive weight that had followed me all my life suddenly lifted. It wasn't a roar or a clap of thunder. It was a profound, quiet release. I took the pages of the Bible, the last testament to Quame's frantic shame, and held them over a small, contained fire. As the brittle paper curled into ash, the serpent's binding was broken, not by magic but by transparency. Life did not snap back into place. My old job did not call. Musa did not return, but the anxiety was gone. The cold dread that had settled in my bones was replaced by a quiet, persistent peace. I didn't rebuild the glass tower of my career. I started a small, simple business working with local artisans. It was hard work with long hours and low pay, but it was stable and joyful. No sudden tragedies. No inexplicable losses. My mother and aunts didn't forgive me overnight, but slowly over months they started to heal. They came to my new home, and for the first time they didn't talk about their successes, they talked about their failures. My mother confessed how terrifying it had been to live with my father, knowing the curse was waiting. Aunt Adwoa, having shed the burden of her own shame, rediscovered her light. She met a kind widower at a community event, a simple, good man, and for the first time in 40 years, she allowed herself a quiet, unexpected happiness. The curse couldn't touch it because the joy was real, not purchased with a lie. We are not perfect. We still face struggles, debt, and challenges. That is simply life. But we are no longer cursed. We are no longer puppets pulled by the strings of a terrible secret. We became free people. If you felt that chill, if this story resonated with a burden your family carries, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Tales of the Black Soil for more real, unsettling stories from the heart of Africa.